Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Mirror Thinking, How Role Models Make Us Human. My name is Gemma Soul, I'm a director at School for CEOs and your host for today's webinar. And I'm delighted to welcome today's guest speaker, psychologist Fiona Martin, who has agreed to share a sneak preview of her book, Mirror Thinking, which actually isn't released until tomorrow, so it really is a bit of a sneak preview. And just to give you a little bit of background into Fiona, Fiona is founder of Aroka, which profiles senior leaders from all over the world for senior leadership positions. She's also an advisor, a coach, a keynote speaker, an award-winning author, podcast host, and finally a good friend of School for CEOs. So hi Fiona and welcome.
Thanks so much, Gemma. The three sections that I'd like to go through today are the mirror neuron, our life path, and how do you want to use it? So how do you want to use what we talk about today? We'll start with the mirror neuron, the story of a forgotten child, monkey see, monkey do, and the world as we know it. Oksana Malaya was born in a small rundown village in Ukraine in 1983. Both of her parents were alcoholics, and one night, too drunk to care, they left Oksana outside. Looking for warmth and safety, she crawled up with stray dogs that roamed the area. No one noticed she was gone or came to look for 3-year-old Oksana, and she spent the next 5 years living as a member of the pack until she was discovered by the authorities. By the age of 8, Oksana had become what's known as a feral child. She couldn't speak, walked on all fours, ate raw meat, scavenged through rubbish for food, and barked like a dog. She had grown through those years mimicking the behavior of the dogs. Without parents to mirror, she hadn't developed the ability to socialize, interact, communicate, talk, walk, or even eat in the way we'd expect. This story provides a really strong representation of how the systems in our brain operate, particularly the social systems. There needs to be a model in the environment to stimulate development. And this is a form of role modeling that takes place throughout life, and it happens via a mechanism in the brain which is dependent on something called the mirror system. It's often the only way we learn the nuances and complexity of behavior and emotion. In the same way we need to watch someone serve in tennis, it's nearly impossible to do it correctly without having seen it, just following instructions. People have to see the social and emotional aspects of learning role modeled in order to understand and adopt them. If you think about it, can you remember how you learned to tie your shoelaces, to swim, or to ride a bike? Do you know where your value system came from? Can you recall who taught you how to do the job you're doing today? You may be able to pinpoint some situations in which you've learned specific skills or people who've taught things to you, but generally it's dependent on those subtle ongoing observations and imitations that we're constantly making in response to others. Monkey see, monkey do. Discovery of the mirror neuron. It was 1992, and neurophysiologist Rizzolatti and his team at Parma University were trying to understand how the brain coordinates the muscles in the hand. Using electrodes inserted into the brains of macaque monkeys, they were able to monitor the very smallest unit of the brain, the neuron. And you probably know a neuron lets parts of our body talk to each other, such as nerve cells and muscles, and it also enables us to have thoughts. They were specifically interested in when these neurons fired to pass on information to other parts of the brain and body. One day, the team were eating lunch in the same room as the monkeys and noticed that the neurons fired when the monkey wasn't even performing an action. The monkey was watching one of the scientists bring food to his mouth, and the same neuron that was involved in the monkey bringing food to its own mouth was activated. This really was a case of monkey see, monkey do. Rizzolatti published their findings, naming the cells the mirror neurons. What makes the mirror neuron unique is it fires in the same way when we do something like hit a tennis ball, and when we see someone else doing exactly the same thing, like hitting a tennis ball. Even if, for example, we're watching Wimbledon on TV, sitting completely still on the sofa. It's what helps us learn how to do things by watching and observing people. The world as we know it. It wasn't until 2000 when neuroscientist Ram Chandran began to publicize the findings that the mirror neuron became really prominent. He claimed mirror neurons would do for psychology what DNA did for biology. He listed our understanding of why people imitate the actions of others, how cultural norms spread through populations, how people understand the intention of others' actions, how children learn music, even the anticipation of what is going to happen next, the prediction and understanding of someone else's actions or their next move as being dependent on the mirror neuron. There are neuroscientists who quote the very people I've spoken to in researching this book and say they're wrong, that the mirror neuron doesn't exist. That, as I point out at the start of the book, is for them to debate. There is, however, no doubt that the power of mirroring has enabled you to become you and me to become me, and for humanity to evolve to where it is today. In the time of our ancient ancestors, knowledge transfer happened via social mechanisms, passing understanding on from generation to generation through mirroring, watching, doing, and storytelling. Without this, we simply would not be where we are today. We wouldn't have an iPhone or running water, antibiotics, or aeroplanes. This has all been built up from collective learning over thousands of years, which began at the most basic level. Before humans could write things down in order to share knowledge, social transfer and mirroring was the only means of progression. We go on to the next section. So part one, we looked at the story of the forgotten child and how much that shows us about the importance of having people to mirror from when we're born. Monkey see, monkey do. Where did the mirror neuron come from? How was it discovered? And the importance of mirroring to have got us to the point at which we're at today. So the next bit, our life path. We're going to look at the impact of parents, friends, and the teenage years and adulthood. So as we've just seen with the survey results, which is fantastic, 85% of people are saying that their parents have been the strongest influence in their lives. And when we do psychological profiling, one of the things we always do is go back through someone's personal narrative and their childhood, and people always discuss the impact of their parents. And sometimes we're not fully conscious of what that impact has been, but it's inevitable that they have been an immensely strong presence in all of our lives. And so when we look at it from a neuroscientific perspective, research shows that babies as young as 41 minutes old will imitate someone sticking their tongue out at them. And this is actually believed to be one of the very first demonstrations of the mirror neuron in action. A baby observes someone sticking out their tongue, their mirror neuron fires, rehearsing that action in their own brain, and they then reproduce it. Scientists aren't sure yet whether these mirror neurons are innately programmed to imitate, or if given the right conditions, they begin to mirror the behavior after birth. The most critical point, however, is that the mirror neurons are almost certainly involved, and the act of using them iteratively refines their capability throughout life. In our early years, when we're with our caregivers or parents, mirroring takes place roughly once every minute. By 10 weeks old, our mirroring has escalated from simple gestures like sticking out our tongue to spontaneously imitating happy and angry expressions when they're displayed by our parents. During the first year of life, before language is acquired, a parent and child can only communicate by observation, making this capability absolutely critical to development. Marco Iacoboni, who was one of the professors I was lucky enough to meet when I was writing this book, is professor of psychiatry at UCLA, and he's carried out research to show how this interaction triggers mirror neurons in both the baby and the mother, providing a two-way imitation for continued growth. Iacoboni and his team found that a mother will synchronize her behavior with the facial expressions she sees in her baby, and the baby will respond. And this creates a positive attachment and a virtuous cycle of mirroring. which leads to the development of the baby's mirror system and ultimately forms the basis from which they are able to understand and form social relationships. This capability of a parent to share their baby's emotional feelings is considered absolutely critical to healthy social and emotional development. And that continues throughout our life. It's also the basis of which empathy is built. So from toddler to child to teen, we know our parents shape us, but it's probably more than we ever even realized. You just have to look at Oksana to see what happens without their input. And it's probably really useful for you as we're going through this to think about the impact that your parents have had on you and your life path. How are you like them? How aren't you like them? What have you picked up from them? What haven't you picked up from them? Friends and the teenage years. So adolescence is a time of life when we prepare to be independent with a strong need to learn more about the world around us. I have a teenage daughter, and so this is something that's very front of mind for me. Reassuringly, if you're the parent of a teen, research has shown that parents still remain a significant influence on adolescents, but it tends to be values and morals that are mirrored, as opposed to social and everyday behaviour where peers have a stronger impact. And it's at this stage of life that the part of the brain known as the social brain is undergoing huge structural development. If you think about it in terms of your own teenage years and how you were exploring the world and what you were up to then. And unsurprisingly, this has led to concerns about the impact of lockdown on teenagers. Findings suggest that when social contact is taken away from teens, it can cause a rise in anxiety and decrease in brain functions associated with learning and memory. So what can you do if you're the parent of a teenager? Well, social media can actually help in the absence of contact, but it can also hinder. Research has shown that active use of social media, for example, messaging and posting on someone's profile, can have a positive impact. However, passive use of social media, such as scrolling through feeds, has a negative impact on well-being. Added to this, it's really important to be aware of who your teens are following and how they're digesting social media. And when life returns to normal, being conscious of who they're sharing time with, which sounds obvious, but it's really worth thinking about. Because there's a large body of research showing that children getting involved in sport, which I think David and Jen will be pleased to hear, or volunteering, where they're surrounded by a constructive mindset, has a really strongly positive impact and acts as a counter mirroring of less positive behaviours. Studies, for example, have shown an adolescent girl who's involved in sport is less than half as likely to get pregnant as a teenage girl not involved in sport. And this all makes sense, really. It feels like something we know already, but we now have evidence to back that up. What we know less about is the impact that scrolling and spending hours on technology will have in the long run. One thing's for certain, it distracts us even as adults from our continued social and emotional development, which is dependent on the mirror neuron throughout life. We risk becoming what I call social and emotional zombies. Adulthood. In adulthood, we are still influenced by our social brain. Counterintuitively, adolescents are more proactive and conscious in monitoring their own attitudes compared with those of their peers than we are as adults. As adults, our mirror system carries on adapting our attitudes and behaviour, often without us noticing. The impact of friends is clearly demonstrated in research on obesity. A study published in 2007, following more than 12,000 participants for 30 years, found that people are more likely to gain weight if they interact with other people who have gained weight. But the chances of gaining weight increased by an amazing 171% if that person who gained weight was a close friend. This isn't helped by the fact that the reward circuits in the brain are activated when we agree and align with others. A study carried out at UCL in 2010 used music tastes to test this. And they found that people would unconsciously realign their music preferences or the value placed on a particular song to mirror others in a group. When they moved their tastes away from their own preferences to align with and more closely mirror the people around them, dopamine pathways were activated in the brain. But there becomes almost an arrogance in our belief as we become adults that we get influenced by those around us. But the fact is, when it's unconscious, it can be even more dangerous. With our brain mechanisms ensuring that agreeing with and mirroring other people feels good, even when it goes against our own values. It's the work of the mirror system helping us to fit in, mostly without any conscious awareness. And while it allows us to feel accepted, which is a fundamental human need, it can also cause problems. For example, within the context of organisations, I'm sure you'll have all heard of hiring in your own image. It's common and seems to catch people out time and again. Even senior leaders that I work with need reminding that they will always have leanings known as affinity bias, unintentionally favouring someone who has similar attitudes, beliefs, values and capabilities to them. This isn't deliberate, it happens at a subconscious level to all of us. Yet we know that broader diversity is essential for optimal performance. Even business psychologists who should have very deep understanding of these phenomena still need to remind themselves. And for me, my personal pitfall is having a shared passion for skiing or snowboarding. If that comes up in a profile, I have to literally deliberately and consciously check myself so as not to get swayed in my decision making. Well, when we do understand the mechanisms and make a conscious effort to observe what's going on around us, we can choose which behaviours to take on board and how we respond. Huge advances in neuroscience over the past couple of decades have allowed us to see what's going on with the mirror neuron at a more detailed level, and research has illuminated a specific area of the brain that relates to what I call mirror thinking. And looking under the hood, neuroscientists have discovered that the internal processes of role modeling, so imagination, empathy, storytelling, and reflection, are all also dependent on the mirror neuron. For example, when someone tells a story, so when I told you about Oksana earlier, the brain of the storyteller and your brain synchronized via the mirror neuron, which makes it a hugely powerful tool in a range of contexts, from teaching children through to communicating as a leader. A sports professional is able to visualize their technique, improving performance via the mirror neuron, almost role modeling themselves in essence. Our ability to reflect and make sense of the world is dependent on the mirror neuron. So when I asked you to think about your own experiences, for example, but perhaps most powerfully, we're able to feel what others feel, to mirror the emotions and pain of others in our brain via the mirror system. Part 2, so the impact of our parents, friends in the teenage years and adulthood, and then we've just had some questions. Part 3, well, how do you want to use it? Who are you mirroring? Who's looking at you? And changing the world, one nuance at a time. Well, what's really important to think about as I'm presuming a lot of people on this are leaders themselves, and it becomes more difficult as we move through life to find those role models. But it's hopefully by now it's clear that we mirror the people around us all the time, whether we intend to or not. So it makes sense to bring mirroring into consciousness, to choose what and who we mirror and what and who not to take us in the direction we want in life, rather than being unintentionally diverted off track. So if you think of yourself as a role modelee, I mean, you might never have considered yourself as that, but it's key to go into any interaction with an open mind and to be curious. I like to think of it as imagining you're a detective. You're observing which points of people around you can help you to develop your own behaviour and which things you want to avoid. one thing's for certain, whoever you role model, you don't want to copy anyone outright. Ultimately, you're learning behaviours and approaches, but the core values and personality that you have will always remain true to you, which again, I think if I'm talking to leaders here, you know that already, it's not something new. But it's looking at which aspects of what someone does and how they do it resonate with who you are. And Gemma and David have done work on reverse mentoring, and it's the same principle here. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone who's more senior, more experienced. It can be someone younger. It can be someone from a completely different area of life to you. But it's useful, if you're going to go about it deliberately, to start with a broad understanding of your needs and then work out who is best going to meet those needs. And especially if you're asking someone to be what I call a personal role model, or you might want to call a mentor, so someone who you actually have a relationship with, as opposed to someone who you don't know, who might be an aspirational role model. But it's remembering it doesn't have to all come down to one person. So when it comes to, for example, aspirational role models, you might want to look at, these are just examples, they might not resonate, but Martin Luther King for his communication skills, Alan Mulally from Ford for pulling a company through a crisis, Alex Ferguson for his discipline and focus. And you may look outside of leadership to someone like Maya Angelou for her wisdom, courage and determination, or the pilot Captain Chelsea Sully Sullenberg, who landed a plane on the Hudson River in New York after losing the power in both engines, for how to stay calm and how to work as a member of a team. And there are so many people, I think we'd all agree, that have done incredible things in the world, and we just need to explore them in order to see what they are and how they may apply to us. They may not even be that far away. Often we can look to one of our parents who have more in common with us than anyone else to think about how they do or did something exceptionally well, and how we can take learning from that and more consciously use it. And as was the question, you may also want to identify people who you're going to consciously counter mirror bits of someone that you don't like and you don't want to be like. Particularly when it comes to something like unethical behaviour or treating people in a way that goes against your values. So hopefully by this point you do realise that we are all role models, whether we feel like we are or not. But actually consciously choosing to be a role model makes it even more effective. There's research done with doctors which show that when a more senior doctor is consciously aware that they're role modeling certain behaviours to more junior doctors, the transfer of that knowledge becomes more effective. And there's also lots of benefits of actually choosing to be a role model. Research shows that it's not just the modelee who benefits, but the reciprocity of empowerment also improves the well-being of role models themselves. And added to all that, being a role model in the work environment has been shown to benefit through providing a chance to reflect on your own approach, which can enhance performance and improve levels of self-awareness, enhancing job satisfaction, improving emotional intelligence and relationship skills, enabling you to pass on your learning and experience, increasing your understanding of what's going on around you at a political level, and learning to see things from different perspectives, improving your capability to develop others, and growing your leadership skills with a greater understanding of how to motivate and engage people. If you choose to be a role model in the more conscious sense of it, it's really important to connect, build trust, be developmentally focused and be committed. So if you're taking on the role of the personal role model or the mentor, it depends a great deal on establishing strong, high quality relationships. And you might want to be explicit about the relationship, actually offering to be a personal role model, or it may be a relationship that doesn't need a label. For example, if you're an uncle or an aunt or a parent, it's critical that there's trust and connection are there as a foundation. And in some circumstances, being a role model isn't a choice, as with being a parent, but that tends to infer a natural trust and connection with your child. But taking the time to think about that consciously can still make a big difference to the quality of the learning that you're passing on. At the other end of the scale, if you're becoming a personal role model to someone you've never met, especially someone from a different background to you, trust and connection have to be built. And research studies with something in the US called Big Brother, Big Sister scheme, which has been running for over 100 years, as role modeling and mentoring with underprivileged kids, shows that it really does take time and patience to build that trust and connection. But it's absolutely essential when it comes to having a positive impact. And you have to be present and you have to live up to commitments, because trust is quickly eroded by letting someone down. Developmental focus is core, so it's important to consciously and proactively focus on your role model's goals rather than your own. And I have to check myself on this when I'm coaching, because what I think is best is not necessarily right for the coachee. So I may, for example, think that someone should apply for a more senior role, but when I explore the situation in more depth, I learn they have concerns about work-life balance and the impact it would have on their family. And putting my goal or belief about the situation first would be pushing the wrong agenda. I could even inadvertently convince them to do something that doesn't suit their needs, which is often the case if we're in a role modeling position. Sorry, I realised we're on the wrong slide. And so there are lots of elements actually of executive coaching that can be really helpful when it comes to mentoring or role modeling. And I don't know if you're familiar with the coaching continuum, but there's the tell side and the facilitative side, and it's really trying to remain on that facilitative end of the spectrum. So changing the world. So if we're equipped with this knowledge of how the more positive aspects of role modeling operate, and harnessing that understanding of the mirror system, we really do have the ability to make huge differences within society. Take, for example, the impact on young people. Research carried out by UCL found the cost to the UK of not having adequate social and emotional learning in schools is 17 billion. I had to check that number several times, but that's what it says. And that's because of the knock-on physical and emotional health that's given or taken away from not developing those skills, the life outcomes, reduced opportunities for social mobility and employment. And I think surely we can use our knowledge to change this by simply making better use of really what are the natural systems of being human. Perhaps removing obstacles such as too much technology, and in the case of schooling, overloaded curriculums. But there are also examples where role modelling has happened in a natural system and had measurably positive impact on society. In India, in April 1993, the government passed a constitutional amendment that required all village councils, traditionally populated by higher caste men, to hold regular elections open to all. The other contentious mandate was that 1/3 of the seats had to be reserved for women. The project was hailed by the UN as one of the best innovations in grassroots democracy in the world, impacting a population of more than 800 million people. Before the legislation was passed, only 5% of local leadership roles were carried out by women. By the year 2000, this had increased to more than 40%. The direct intention of the project was to increase female representation in political forums. However, in 2012, development economist Laurie Beeman set out exploring whether the changes in gender balance had positively shaped parents' and children's beliefs about what women could achieve regarding their education and careers. This, they proposed, could have happened through a direct role modelling effect. Beeman collected data from a rural district located about 200 kilometres from Calcutta, which included more than 8,000 girls aged 11 to 15. Astonishingly, they found that the gender gap in educational attainment was completely erased. Controlling for other factors, Beeman was able to show that women in leadership positions and their presence as positive role models for the younger generation influenced the ambition of girls themselves and their parents' aspirations for them. So before these quotas existed, neither parents nor children had seen women playing a role in leadership. So how could they imagine what that looked like? How could a girl imagine themselves reaching the position, or parents believe it was a possibility? Once that mirror was made available, it had an enormously positive impact on the communities involved. So who are you mirroring? Who are the people that you are choosing to look at and to pick up behaviours from? And who's looking at you? Do you know who's looking at you? And how can you make that role modelling more effective? And then how can we use role modelling to help change the world, one nuance at a time? I'm going to quickly do conclusion, and then maybe we come back to questions, if that's okay. So we looked at mirroring and thinking, mirror thinking and role models, how they make us human. The presence of other people, particularly those close to us, enable us to talk, learn, pass on knowledge, to love, to have meaningful relationship. Without this form of learning, we wouldn't be creative, we'd be unable to daydream, imagine, tell stories, or to produce great works of art, music, film, and literature. We simply wouldn't have evolved from the cave dwellers of prehistory to the human race we are today. It literally makes us who we are. How has it impacted you, your life path? Only you know, but if one thing is for sure, you can work with your brain rather than against them to use this knowledge, and it can actually help break negative cycles in our lives and enhance the lives of the next generation. How do you want to use it? The quality of each and every interaction improves every single relationship and increases that chance of us passing on knowledge and powerfully an understanding of what human relationships could and should be. The invisible domino effect of one positive interaction will be huge. In fact, it can impact the whole of humanity. On that dramatic note, I go back to questions.
Thank you. If you have further reflections or questions for Fiona after the webinar, well, the best way to answer those is by buying her book, which you can pre-order today or buy in store tomorrow. And Bloomsbury, her publishers, have very kindly made a 25% discount code available through their website. So I'll send the link to everyone after the webinar. And also there's the code there as well. And I'll put that in my follow-up email to you all as well. Thank you so much, Fiona, for joining us. I've really enjoyed reading it so far. And now that you've heard Fiona's voice, you'll have a voice to narrate.
I'm not sure that's a good thing.
And it's been really interesting for me thinking about how we support leaders and how we help organizations start conversations around diversity. To understand some of the neuroscience that underpins our behaviors is a really important step in that. So thank you very much. It's been great as always, and I've learned something new every time I speak to you. So thank you for joining us, and best of luck with the book.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks everyone for participating and asking questions, and I hope I've answered them. If not, get in contact, please.
Yes, both of our email addresses are there, so please do get in touch, and you can follow us all on Twitter and such like as well.
Yeah, great.
Take care, everyone, and hopefully see you again on the next one.
Thank you.